Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend Toby Weir-Jones from Bayshore Networks. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Ed. Good to see you again.
It's so good to see you. Hey, listen, for some of the folks who might be less familiar with Bayshore, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your platform does, and then we can get into some of the technology. What does the platform do?
Yeah, sure. So Bayshore provides active OT protection. So we have 3 different products, and they all do the same core function, which is they look at activity in your OT network, and they protect you from bad stuff. We do that in real time. So you don't have a sort of timing or a human capital gap. We take action on your behalf and let you, decide if you want that to remain or make changes going forward. Mm-hmm. And we have 3 different products that go into your network to sit closest to where different kinds of OT activity is created and where it's most important.
Is there a difference between OT and industrial control technology? Are they the same thing?
They're similar, yeah. OT is operational technology. Mm-hmm. So it's a sort of umbrella term for automation tools and the software systems that run them and some of the special hardware, and then the machines that are all connected to it.
Mm-hmm. This would be things like factories and power plant, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would cars also? Cars and airplanes, things like that?
It can be, yeah. It's essentially all the stuff that is to do with industrial processes. Yeah. So we're looking at factories, we're looking at utilities, water plants, purpose-built environments that are meant to do the same thing over and over and over again in a highly reliable fashion.
Mm. The threat to all of these things, I would imagine, would be the thing that drives you guys. What do you focus on? Is it data? Is it takeover? Is it what is it that you're really trying to avoid?
Yeah, it's takeover. The big thing that's happened in the last 20 years or so is that all these industrial environments, which used to be air-gapped, they weren't connected to the internet in any way, and now they all are. And the danger here is that the rate of connection on those networks has rapidly outpaced the rate of security governance that's sort of trying to keep up. And so the danger now is we have all these systems which were designed in a totally permissive setup. They assumed that they would only ever get instructions from the right place. Right. They would assume that they would only ever be told to do the right things. And now suddenly they're connected to internets and enterprise networks and wide area networks and wireless connections and all sorts of other stuff. And the risk is twofold. One, it's the malicious risk, right? The stuff we read about in the news fairly frequently, where the attacker gets in and takes over and causes damage and harm. But the other risk, which is probably more frequent, although not in the news as much, is the accidental risk. These are complex systems. And now all of a sudden the scale of complexity has increased dramatically. And with the best will in the world, we have situations where people make mistakes, but they have immediate real world consequences because they affect physical processes that are creating stuff or moving stuff that affects people.
What kind of motivation do you see in wanting to take over? There's the obvious one, like a terrorist sort of thing, but are there financial motivation? Are there philosophical? Are there revenge type motivate? What do you tend to see?
It depends on the sophistication of the attacker. I mean, clearly there are, we'll call it the high end, there are state level sponsored actors.
The military
and the intelligence agencies and the reconnaissance activities. And that stuff does happen, and those stories are real. There's surveillance going on, not just into the United States, but out of it. Ukrainian power, right? Yeah. Norsk Hydro, malware, ransomware, all of this stuff. And some of it is financial. Ransomware works well as an industrial attack vector because most of the systems are unprotected. And you can lock down an entire plant or an entire company because once you get in, the thing propagates like wildfire because there aren't really a lot of host level or endpoint protection tools.
What about insiders? I would imagine it's a huge attack vector.
Right? It is.
Because this is not easy stuff, I'm guessing.
No.
Like to take over something like this. I don't think you just read a little a Reddit post and you know how to take over a wind turbine.
You don't know how to take over the turbine, but the problem is they're all connected to essentially old versions of unprotected workstations. Most of the control software runs on old versions of Windows.
Really?
And most of that doesn't tolerate, host level endpoint software like intrusion prevention or antivirus or anti-malware. So these things, once you're in, essentially it's an open playing field.
So what are some of the key differentiators for the platform when you're talking to clients and prospective buyers? There must be some things you say, hey, these are the things that we think are really unique or exciting about what we're doing. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, the key thing for us really is this inline real-time protection. And we call it active OT.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're sitting on the wire, we're looking at all the native activity that goes between all these different nodes. And if we see things that are problematic, and there's a whole range of reasons why it might be, we're going to block it. We're going to say, no, this instruction can't go to that controller because it's going to cause the controller to do something that the customer doesn't want. It may be a malicious reason that the instruction was there, or it may be accidental, but in the moment, what's important is the instruction doesn't succeed. And then after the fact, we can find out whether somebody didn't follow procedure or if there really was a rogue actor somewhere on the network.
Is it a hard thing to do? Does it take a long time to deploy something like that?
It doesn't have to. The industry where Bayshore sits, the past few years, there's been a lot of folks that have invested in sort of large-scale vulnerability management platforms and inventory platforms. And those are great if you have a sort of an OPSEC capability, an operational security practice that's sophisticated enough to make use of it.
Yeah.
But most of the customers with these environments, they don't have that yet. And they won't for another probably 10 years. It's a skills gap, it's a sort of relevance of market gap. And if we're dealing with a manufacturing facility in the Midwest that's been churning out product for the last 30, 40 years, and they have a nice steady business with it, they're not going to attract sort of high-end IT security people who come in and become industrial security analysts for that factory. Geographically they're not in the right place, and economically they're not really in the market where those skills are highly prized. So the challenge is, what can we do to give them something now, to give them an immediate solution? And that's where Bayshore's positioned itself.
And you can do this, does it take weeks, months? How long to get something like this deployed?
I can protect a typical regional utility in a week.
In a week?
In a week. And this is inclusive of assessing the tool, installing it, proving that it works, and signing off on the commissioning.
Is that something that's part of sort of the sort of the statement about the product, like, hey, we can get this thing out real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. The goal that we really brought to this product, and we call it Catastrophes, was to make it as easy to deploy into an existing OT environment as possible.
Yeah.
And that means it has to be presented and work in a way that's familiar to the staff who are there, not the staff and skills that pie in the sky wish were there. Right? So it needs to be relevant to how these guys are already working and how the plant already gets things done. And so that was the first challenge. The second challenge was to make sure it would just work as soon as you spin it up with the equipment, the PLCs, the software they already have.
From major manufacturers?
Yeah, from all the major manufacturers. So we needed to have support for the right protocols and to understand what those protocols were saying. Even if the sort of OT plant manager may not be a network engineer, but he knows that he's got Rockwell equipment or Siemens equipment or whatever it is, and that's where he hangs his hat.
And you guys sit right on the wire there.
We do. We sit right in line. So SCADAfuse is plugged in line right next to the PLCs it's protecting. So installation is unplug it from the switch, plug into SCADAfuse, run a cable back to the switch, and you're done.
How does somebody know that once they've deployed SCADAfuse, is there like some success criteria that comes to mind in terms, like are they just trying to get visibility, or is there a clear purpose for putting the thing in place?
The goal is to protect the equipment from takeover.
Yeah.
And that's priority number one.
And so you can demonstrate that, I guess.
We can demonstrate it. So there are simple ways to demonstrate it. Once we've learned what the normal patterns are, the normal relationships on that network, we present those back to the customer. And the customer will say, yeah, okay, these are the IP addresses for my workstations or my historian or whatever I have. And these are the IP addresses for the PLCs I'm protecting. And so that's fine. I know those relationships are meant to be there, and I know that this is meant to be a read, this is meant to be a read-write, this is meant to be a full access read-write reconfigure, whatever it might be. So the first test is to say, okay, I'm going to plug in my laptop into this open port on the switch, and I'm going to try and connect to that PLC. And I can't, because SCADAfuse is going to block me, because I'm a rogue source. I'm not meant to be there. The other test is let's say I've got a relationship where I'm pushing messages back to a historian. And the way that usually works is the historian will connect to the PLC and say, tell me what you've done. That's a read instruction. If the historian turns around and starts trying to reconfigure that PLC, again, that's a policy violation. And I'll say, okay, no, don't let that happen. And what that's protecting against is somebody piggybacking on the trusted IP address of the historian and trying to insert, new activity that wasn't meant to come from there.
That's interesting. Without getting into pricing or anything like that, is this a high-end expensive thing? Is it kind of low-end affordable, kind of in the middle? How do you guys position the affordability?
Our priority was to make it something that a plant manager could buy out of their discretionary spend.
Yeah.
So it's
not make a big giant fuss about.
No, and some of these folks are public utilities, right? So in general, they have rules about going to bid and doing public tenders and all that kind of stuff. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible to flow through that process without 18 months of budget planning and all the rest of it. So a standard SCADA fuse device, it's about $5,000.
That'll be darn. That's very, very affordable. Now, let's switch gears here a little bit. Where has we're here in New York in the United States, so where's the U.S. FedGov been in this area? There's some commissions. Is there anything that worth referencing? And then maybe internationally, do you see other countries kind of maybe they're doing the same or better job or worse job? Where's government been?
Government, so it's interesting. Back in 1998, there was a presidential directive to start looking into critical infrastructure protection.
Yeah.
And there were 9 categories of infrastructure that were identified at the beginning, and there were a few more that were added later. But the only ones that really started engaging, or perhaps were engaged by industry, software guys like me, was sort of bulk power and nuclear, financial services, and transportation, primarily to do with air travel. And the other categories, the other 6 in that original list, didn't really get a lot of attention. So we had, NERC came along, and we started developing the SIP regulations, and they've proven to be widely adopted and mirrored in the EU and in some other markets. We had obviously lots of governance and security controls to do with financial services and the financial industry. And we had obviously DHS, and in the wake of 9/11 in particular, a huge increase of attention on the transportation infrastructure. But the other categories still kind of bumped along without a whole lot of attention. And if you think about it, water is a utility, a critical infrastructure that affects 99% of the population directly. And there's thousands
kind of affects 100%.
Probably 100. There's some folks who ultimately aren't connected to a water
1%,
plant. Yeah, right. The guys with their own wells. But in general terms, the water services business, whether it's drinking water, wastewater, or water reclamation, has essentially flown under the radar for the 20 years. And we're seeing that finally change. So Congress passed a law in 2018, which was to do with the Drinking Water Infrastructure Act. And it included specific rules that every community water system servicing at least 1,000 customers had to implement a risk assessment and a remediation plan over the next 3 years, depending on how big they are, where they fall on the schedule. So now finally, EPA has been given some teeth to go and demand an improvement in governance. But what we're still waiting for are the more prescriptive guidelines about what exactly that's going to mean. So you remember when HIPAA came along.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew what the consequences were going to be if you failed a HIPAA audit until the first few went through the whole cycle. We're going to see that too. But there's another interesting piece, which is that the feds created a commission called the Solarium Commission. And Solarium, yeah. And it's headed up by a retired Admiral Mark Montgomery. And what they're doing is looking at perhaps going from the first 3 critical infrastructure classes and adding a couple more and giving them those teeth. And water is one of the ones that they're interested in. We're going to see some initial recommendations in the springtime next year, which are going to get into the sort of meat and potatoes of what it means to protect a water system from cyber attack. So it's something that Bayshore's happily supporting, and we think it's important. But we know that a lot of water districts all over the country are sort of waiting to see what comes out of these recommendations. And our argument is going to be, you don't have to boil the ocean to solve this problem. You can spend a pretty small percentage of your total annual operating budget. It's not really going to make a big difference on your rate requisitions to your state authorities or any of these sorts of issues. And you can go from essentially zero security to real security in a week or less. It's a good story.
It makes sense. Is power there as well? I mean,
power is there, and particularly on the rural power co-ops, which tend to aggregate a lot of business, and they have another interesting challenge, which is they have to deal with very, very large geographical service areas for relatively low customer density. So they have a lot of unstaffed facilities, and one of the challenges there is if you have a problem, if an unstaffed facility has an issue, you've got to roll a truck. And that might take you 4, 5, 6 hours to get out there and find out what's going on. So again, something like SCADAfuse, which can act automatically without waiting for human intervention, can essentially keep the lights on in the event that somebody gains access to that remote facility and starts messing around.
Interesting. I want to ask you about OT/IT and maybe just some thoughts in that area. Do you see maybe a convergence where, or will they remain separate?
There's definitely a convergence, and there should be. Honestly, it's like a lot of security practices. Transparency is key to acceptance and comfort, right? So SCADAfuse is positioned for the OT guys to sort of pick it up and lead with it, but it also includes features that allow IT to see what it's doing. We'll push logs into their central archiving systems, their analytics platforms, their SIMs. No problem. Happy to do it. We want them to be a part of the decision, and we know that from an architectural point of view, if they do their own independent testing on the basic security controls of the device, they're going to be happy with the results. But the convergence, it doesn't mean that OT's needs ultimately get ignored, right? OT needs to focus on operational continuity and uptime. And so SCADAfuse includes features that speak to that directly. It has a network bypass at a hardware level. So if SCADAfuse, suffers a problem or the device fails, it turns into a wire. And the PLC still can talk to the rest of the network. It keeps working. We don't cut it off like a firewall would if a firewall went dark. It includes hardware key security. So you can't reconfigure a SCADAfuse without physically connecting a key for initial setup into the appliance itself, but for in-life maintenance and management into the workstation that you're using to connect to it across your network. And again, that's meant to be a familiar model where you're signing out keys from the cabinet or proximity cards or whatever it might be. So we're trying to ensure that even though this is a very innovative ICS security tool, operationally it works in a way that's familiar to the targets, and that's the OT staff first and foremost.
A pretty big issue that's been persistent in OT security is kind of a lack of training and background in cybersecurity for really competent engineers. I mean, people who are designing and operating things like factory plants and so on. These are smart people, but they didn't take courses in, source code vulnerabilities or
secure coding practice, any of that stuff.
Part of the curriculum, not part of the. How do you guys deal with that? Because I would imagine when you walk in, there's probably a very, maybe an innocence around which threats are, like, which is a bigger threat? Leaking data or takeover, they would say, a lot of them would say, gosh, I haven't really thought about that. What do you do when you walk into that
They all
environment?
know that security has become at least an ephemeral problem.
Yeah.
They may not have felt it personally in their particular environment yet, but they know, and they're fairly receptive to the conversation, that even if they wrote the code that runs the plant, and that code's been running for 20 years, and that's true in a lot of these environments.
Right.
If you ask them about, what could jeopardize that, the first thing that usually comes up is the fact that, an unexpected participant gets on the network and starts changing things.
Well put.
It was a reasonable premise that if you wrote something in the belief that it wasn't connected to anything else and you knew everybody who was there, that it would be fairly robust.
Yeah.
And that's proven to be true. The danger now is that these, as you said, they didn't have the knowledge of the sort of radical increase in connectivity and all of the new sort of exposures that creates. And most of these industrial control systems, even if they offer security features within their various applications, most of the customers aren't turning them on, because the perception is it increases overhead and complexity and possibility of operational downtime. So this is why we felt it was so important to be able to wrap around exactly what their code does and add security on the network without having to touch the endpoint itself. So there's no reconfiguration required, there's no firmware changes, there's none of that for any of the assets themselves.
Do you have to be sort of a trainer teacher? It's in some sense as you're off visiting with clients, or is that diminishing?
There's some of that, but when we show them the sort of the proposed acceptance criteria for what defines success with this
pretty
tool,
familiar.
It's and it's like 4 things. It's a short list, and again, we recognize that we're there because we have a degree of expertise and we're bringing something new to the table. But we don't want it to be so alien and abstractly overwhelming that they're going to shut down, right? We want to have an open conversation and say, look, what can we do, which isn't about shining a spotlight on somebody's failure. It's about accepting that the world has moved forward, and now we're dealing with a new reality.
When you hear big hyperbole about catastrophes that can occur, I'm curious how you respond to those. Like, you have a very reserved engineering personality. I suspect you're not prone to hyperbole. But you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Oh my gosh, somebody will take over,
Yeah, I mean...
What do you think about those scenarios?
There's a risk analysis calculation that you can always do. You can always get an increasingly accurate model for any given environment. And that's fine, but it doesn't change the binary state of whether or not somebody's felt it personally. What we say is not so much this terribly catastrophic thing could happen tomorrow. What we say is, what would you do if your water supply was contaminated and you didn't know how or why? How do you react to that? Because the first thing you have to do is tell people to stop consuming the water. And in an enterprise environment, if you get, say, 95% coverage on a notification like that, by normal metrics, that's pretty good, right? Stop sending email, unplug your laptop, things like that. If you can cover 95% of your users, that's successful. But if you're servicing, 250,000 customers with a water plant, and you can only contact 95% of them, that's 25,000 people who are going to consume contaminated water. And that is a major public health catastrophe. And there's no undo for that. And this is the problem, right? We don't frame it in terms of, again, the sort of scary guys in dark hoodies. We frame it in terms of, regardless of the reason, what happens when you're dealing with a physical, real-world attack and the consequences that flow from it.
You'd referenced the 98 work, in 1998.
Yeah.
Dick Clark was kind of in the middle of a lot of that. He's
Yeah.
a good friend of mine, and he's told me a number of times that he believes that until basically lives are really lost in sort of this area, that you never get that full engagement. You get an engagement, but until it really, to your point about feeling it personally, do you think that's right? I mean, it's so depressing to think that something truly bad has to happen before we take these things seriously. But do you feel some of that? I feel it just in cybersecurity my whole career.
I think he's right. And if you look at it, little pockets of the physical infrastructure world have already reacted accordingly. So it's unusual to find a major hospital, for example, that doesn't have multiple redundant backup power supplies. It doesn't have on-site storage for, certified good oxygen, certified good storage of pharmaceuticals. And that's because they need to be able to operate if they're off the grid, right, for at least a reasonable amount of time. But you don't yet see that in water with, as far as I know, one significant exception, which is DC Water. So the DC Water District works in conjunction with DHS and takes physical security very, very seriously because the heads of government are their customers. But there's important people attached to every water district in the country. And they all deserve, the same level of protection, even if it doesn't require the same level of investment.
What an interesting area you work in.
It's fascinating. I mean, Bayshore has I think done a lot of good work in the last year and a half to try and move in this direction. We've been in the industrial security business for 7 years.
Yeah.
So we have a fair degree of sort of entrenched knowledge, but these products, SCADAfuse in particular, we feel is really opening up this technology to markets that we're never going to be serviced by a sort of 6-figure spend.
Yeah.
But at a 4-figure, yeah, they're interested.
Well, I've long admired the work you guys do, and I admire the work you do.
Thank you very much.
Very good thinker in this area. We're lucky that you're working on these problems.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad to share them, and we look forward to continue to roll it out.
It's wonderful to have you here in the studio. Come back again and
Thank
share
you.
more.
We'll be back soon. Thanks,
Thanks
Ed.
for coming by to visit.
Take care. Cheers.
And we will see you next time.